Well, we are going to do something really unusual today. So many of you have asked me if I had pictures of my garden over time, what it used to look like. And I don't have a lot of those because when we first started this garden, or when I first started it, that was pre-digital. So the early phases of it are largely in hard copy images. And I came across a portfolio of them the other day, and I thought it would be fun for us to look back when and then contrast it with what it looks like now. So Stuart's going to have to do some editing on this, aren't you, Stuart?
I am.
But hopefully it will make some sense. So my overall question of the day then is, tell me which way you liked it more. Now, sometimes these were intentional changes I made, and I'll try to explain as we go from vignette to vignette why it changed. Sometimes the changes were intentional, sometimes they were forced by Mother Nature or for some other reason. But I will definitely give you the rationale for why it looks the way it does now versus why it looked the way it did back when. Most of these photos were taken in, I think, 2005 and 2008. The date is on some of the images that Stuart is going to scan. The date is on there, and we'll try to leave that on there so you guys can kind of compare and contrast. And I'll also try to mention, like, please note that such and such wasn't here yet, and that was back in 2005. That is helpful to me because I don't remember the year I planted some of these. I didn't have very good record keeping. Okay, so let's get started. So let's start out with this first long vista of my backyard. It has changed considerably, and you may not notice that unless you really hold one image up against the other. But in the old image, number one, sadly, yes, all of those electrical wires, utility wires are still there. But you'll also notice that in the background, there is a huge tree. I believe that was an elm tree. And it was on the neighbor's side. It is not there any longer. It was a beautiful tree, and I think it got a lot of storm damage. So one of the previous owners that lived in that house, they took that tree down, which, as you can kind of imagine, really changed the microclimate and such in my own landscape. Now, in the corner where that utility pole is, there at one time was a blue Atlas cedar, and it's not huge in this picture, but over time it got quite large. It also died in a year where we had very, very intense heat, and then we had very intense cold. But it was there for quite a while, and it helped camouflage that ugly utility pole. It is no longer there. Note also how the width of the grass. So in the picture, the old picture that was taken April 25th of 2005, you'll notice that the lawn was much wider, and here it really narrows. And it was also back when I had real grass. But notice that the grass is trenched and the edge is just like it was when it was real grass. Now it is that faux turf. And that's one of the reasons I selected the company that I did with this product, was because they were able to replicate the look that I had in the past. This was also when my boys were younger. Stuart, we might kind of start walking around now. Okay. This was also when my boys were younger and they had more room to play. And Hubs and I would sit on the bench over here, which some of you now think needs to be moved because it's so overgrown in that area, but I still like it. It's more of a garden ornament than actually something that's utilitarian, at least at this stage of the growing season. And my kids would play out here. Notice the absence of all of this brick border. That did not used to be here, and I added it later, and I think it adds a real textural component. You can see where the white Deutzia was, which is right here. And in the picture, you can see that it's in bloom. And in front of that white Deutzia, you see a mound of gold. And that was this area in here. And at one time, this was all gold moneywort. and it would look great in the spring, but then it would start getting really buggy and it would be overgrown, and it became a maintenance issue. So I removed all of it and laid down this herringbone pattern of brick as kind of a brick throw rug in the foreground of the bench. And then as I was doing the border for it, it kind of gave me the inspiration to continue with this brick border all around the perimeter of the garden, and it's one of my favorite features now. You'll also notice, I think you can tell, in the very bottom of the shot, around where it shows the date, you can see that there was no brick border over here. It just went directly into flagstone. So I like the way it looks much more finished, and it looks like one more continuous line. You'll also notice that in this area over here, this redbud tree was not there. I'm having to consult the picture as well, you guys. The redbud tree was not here, and there used to be a huge mass of roses that literally climbed the studio, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at a different picture. But I really liked the way that this redbud tree, which, by the way, you guys, I did not plant. It was a volunteer. I just noticed where it was as I noticed the redbud tree over here. And I liked the way they flanked either side of the studio. I did not plant them, I just noticed their presence, and I started to prune them up so there would be this kind of bower effect over this porch that goes into the studio in the back. But neither one of them was there. You'll also notice back here, this is kind of fun for me too, you guys.
Fun for me too.
You'll notice that back here, and Stuart, we might need to just have this photo up on there for reference.
Yeah, well, I'll continually go back and forth to it.
Okay, and this is kind of a trial and error thing, so hopefully this will work. But you'll notice back in here, I used to have two large evergreens, two very pointed columnar evergreens. They almost look like Italian cypress, but they were blue point junipers, which I can't remember if they were removed or if they died. I can't remember, but there was a blue point juniper, and eventually I just removed them. I think it was probably about the corner here. But it was these original blue point junipers back from 2005 that started sending out all of the babies, one of which turned into this topiary. So I think that's kind of a fun,
it's really cool.
Kind of a fun thing, a little bit of garden history and garden anthropology. You'll also notice that in front of the studio, which would be over in here, there's a mound of yellow, and for the longest time I had a huge mound of golden oregano, oregano aurea, and I had that in here, and it was so happy for many, many, many years. And finally I think that the quality of the soil just it just couldn't prosper any longer, but I still love it, and I do look for it because I would like to use it in different containers and things. It looks from a distance very much like golden moneywort, but it's not. In this image you'll see that it's a very chartreusey color. Over the summer it would also revert to green and was a little bit more of a maintenance issue, and so I didn't put it back. I just continued this area with flagstone, brick, and gravel. And then you can see even back then, I loved the way this Boston ivy, hello Stuart.
I'm just waving to Stuart.
How this Boston ivy crawled across the base of the step. And I still like that, and I just kind of contain it. And now, because the rose is no longer on this wall, I allow it to climb up this wall, and I do keep it contained. This is not Virginia creeper, this is that Boston ivy. So let's see, what other changes are here? This area over here, you'll see if you look at the picture, it's on the left. There used to be a rose that climbed up this trellis in the back. And when there wasn't so much shade, that rose did great. It was a Gertrude Jekyll rose, which now has a minor presence on the side arbor, but you may have wondered why I had this lattice there. There also at one time was some clematis that climbed up it. Both the clematis finally, after many years, expired due to clematis wilt, and this tall and very beautiful globular arbor vitae here, I had a series of 3 of those just underneath this this lattice work, and I planted them there to hide the ugly legs of the roses. They were supposed to be a dwarf variety. Obviously, it was not a dwarf variety. As I learned, I removed 2 of them, and then I pruned what was a tiny shrub up into a large tree. And I have to say that I love this now because it needed an evergreen presence and visual weight. It is wonderful in the wintertime, and it also gives now the boxwood and things that grow underneath it in the understory, it gives them a little bit of protection. So I think that accounts for most everything in this picture, Stuart. You want to move on to the next one?
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, probably the most dramatic difference in this photo is the large leaning tree. And you'll notice this was taken in 2006 when I still had real grass. This was taken in 2006, and you'll see that leaning tree where now approximately, Stuart, if you can kind of come over this way, now there's a red bud. And I used to have 2 river birches there. That one trunk you see was originally part of a triple trunk river birch that was there.
And where are we talking about now?
Okay, right here. This tree right here.
Okay.
Okay. On this picture.
And I'll put that on the screen for you.
Right there, okay. That used to be in this area a triple trunk river birch. And over time, in different weather events, we lost 2 of the triple trunks, and this was the remaining one, and ultimately it also had to come down because of storm damage. So in its place, I decided to just let a redbud grow because the redbud is native. It obviously wanted to be there. It planted itself, and over time, it grew up to be this shape. So in 2006 at least, there wasn't a redbud there, and there is now. The other thing to point out is you'll notice that I used to have, this is the same table, I've got different chairs there now. I used to have an umbrella there, and I don't have an umbrella anymore because this area is largely shaded and I don't need it. But just right off the edge of the table and the point of the umbrella, you can see where I planted a blue atlas cedar, and look at how much that blue atlas cedar has grown.
Where's that line? Where did the grass end?
The grass ended about right here. And then I added this additional space out to here so I would have a complete contour of this bed in one continuous line. So another thing that's different is you'll notice that a lot of my trim, the studio doors and some of the trim to my French doors and to my kitchen window, it used to be painted white. And when we had it repainted, I had it painted in this darker gray, partly because that was a much more English look, and also because the white color was just really difficult to maintain. It was a lot more high maintenance. Primarily though, it was an aesthetic decision because it looked a lot more English. So when I did research on Tudor houses, I wanted it to look much more English than it was. The other thing to look at, and Stuart's going to put up 2 different pictures. There's one in 2006, And this tree here with these beautiful, I love this tree and I love the way the Boston ivy climbs it. This one was a volunteer, and you can see right next to the pot that you see in the picture, it's just a little baby in 2006. And then here is the second picture that's more of a close-up shot. You can see how much it has grown between 2006 was the original picture, and in 2008 it has grown considerably. So that's how much growth a redbud can put on in 2 years. And at this point, the one on this side has not yet made an appearance. So interestingly, this one grew up to approximate the size of its twin on the other edge of the porch in short order. So there's almost pretty much complete symmetry there. You'll also notice, let's see what else is different here, Stuart. You'll also notice that there used to be in this area right here, I used to have 2 lounge chairs that matched this furniture. And I ultimately removed them because in the summertime, it's just typically too hot to ever really lounge here. We seldom ever used them. And so I gave them to a nephew who had a rooftop patio. I gave those away. And that was when, about that time is when I introduced the topiary here, which have become a very significant signature touch in my garden, I think. And instead of, and it also used to be that this area right here stopped at about right here. And I wanted to create this bistro area after I had to have some major plumbing work done through here. They had to dig all of this up. So I expanded this area. I put in more matching herringbone brick to match what was over in front of the garden bench, and moved some chairs over in here and created what I call the bistro area now. And the redbud tree that is here now also at one time was a triple trunk river birch to match the one that was on the other side, but they both died. And it used to be river birch trees were a very popular triple trunk tree that was planted in Oklahoma when I first started to garden.
Say that
they
3
were,
times fast.
Yeah, they were very, very popular. They are an absolutely gorgeous tree. And for a while, they were a recommended tree in Oklahoma. No longer, because they come down in the ice and the high winds. They're beautiful, but I ended up going with a native that planted itself, and I just knew that I liked the presence of a tree there based on what was there in the past that I had originally planted. So now, instead of the river birch, I just have a ceiling of redbud.
Well, yeah, that's one of the differences I saw, is there's not anywhere near as much of a canopy kind of over
this whole area, which is why I had an umbrella. And I also, let me look at this picture. Back then, I don't think this maple was here either. So now the maple that protects this Terra hydrangea, it now comes over and kind of closes the ceiling from this side. Now, before the horrific ice storm we had last year, it was almost completely covered.
Yeah.
And actually, as sad as I am that I lost a lot of that coverage, I do about midday, which it is right now, I get enough light on my table that I can have some of my topiaries that like higher light instead of too much shade. So Stuart, should we move on to the next category?
I think so.
Well, this is one of the most dramatic changes, I think, and that is this whole bed of hydrangeas. When I first started to grow these hydrangeas, first of all, there was a lot more light over here. And believe it or not, hydrangeas, the mophead hydrangeas that bloom in the purple and the pink and the blue and the deeper hues, they need pretty much more sun than you would think to actually put on intense color. So that's one of the reasons it looks so different, because now this area is largely shady. But primarily the reason that they don't look this way anymore, and that the ones that I do have, and that's another reason, for example, right here, the ones that are blooming are in a paler color instead of a darker color, because this area is shadier. But the other reason is there's not such profuse bloom is because this whole area used to consist of all mophead hydrangeas that bloomed on old wood. And it never used to be a problem that we would get a very early hard freeze or a very, very late hard freeze to kill out the buds and all of these gorgeous flowers. Over the past 15 years, the hydrangeas that bloomed on all wood, they froze out every single year. They quit reliably blooming, something I had taken for granted, and then they just quit doing that because of hard freezes, either very early or very late in the year. So I started putting in varieties. You'll notice there's no white ones in this image. I started putting in varieties that bloomed on new wood, like the Annabelle that's getting ready to bloom over there, and then these other varieties that you can see here, they're starting to come into bloom. And these also bloom on new wood. Hard late freezes actually can also be a problem for them, but not nearly as severely so. So these are going to start, you can see lots of buds. Can you see buds on them there, Stuart? Oh, yeah. These are going to be a little bit later, and they do bloom in more shade, so they won't have the intensity of the color, which actually in terms of how they resonate with the rest of this stand, I like the paler color with the white blooms that are going to be massive and the white of the oak leaf hydrangea instead of those real vibrant, deeper, more intense colors, because it's a little bit softer and a little bit makes more of a whisper. Here is something that this year has been such a problem more than ever. I'm going to move it before it does any damage. This year, we haven't had a lot of bugs, but boy, one bug we have had are earwigs. Let me know if you live in the Oklahoma area if you've had a lot more earwigs. My creative coordinator, Carrie, she said, oh my gosh, this year the earwigs have just been terrible. She's the bug whisperer, and she said they've been really terrible. So let's move on to the next area, though this one I think was pretty dramatic. This area probably changed very dramatically, and I have named this spot, oh, the exuberance of youth, because I so loved my potager in the back that when this area was very, very sunny, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a small kitchen garden right off of my kitchen and the back stairs. And I put in a tiny second potager with clipped boxwood, because at that time, that was how I defined it. And I grew all sorts of little herbs and things in there. There was at one time a climbing rose that grew up the fence, which way back when I just left natural. And at a certain point, I decided to stain it this dark bronzy brown color. And you guys are going to ask me what color this is, and we will try to put the lid to the formula of the paint can. Stuart, let's try to remember, we'll put that in the community tab. So you guys keep checking the community tab. And then I decided to add a couple of more red buds, because again, I wanted this canopy to be complete. These two I actually planted because the others were so mature, and I kind of wanted to emulate the same degree of maturity. And I wanted it to be an entire ceiling over this area. And so I just pruned them like I pruned the others. Stuart, if you want to kind of do a sweep around there, which is just opening up the branching so that there's good airflow through there. You can see, this is one of my favorite views of the garden from where I'm standing right here, Stuart, looking back to, the light's not great, but looking back to the boxwood orbs and the gorgeous hydrangeas. I love this. And then the contours and the architecture of the redbud tree. And so this area it just got a lot shadier, and this was way too much work. And I was so naive thinking, oh, I can keep up with all of this when I had 2 small children. And I realized, no, I didn't. And it also looked too busy. And
was that still here?
Those were there.
Exactly as they are?
Exactly as they are. Those were there. And there used to be in front of them, again, before it got too shady, in front of them, there were 2 large conical boxwoods, which now live in the back in the potager. I transplanted them because they got oversized for this space. And so then I just let this kind of devolve. I added more brick. I added some stepping stones, and I let this kind of devolve into a much shadier kind of natural garden because I wanted the consistency of the boxwood balls. When you first came in the gate, I added these boxwood balls to repeat and kind of continue the flow of them through the garden. And they can handle this amount of shade, and they also kind of define this space. And I just like this area. It's just ground cover. It has lots of things that go to seed. The yellow columbine, the purple columbine. In here, there is a little bit of purple adenophora, which used to bloom a little more heavily. Now it's a little bit shadier in here, but I don't mind. And then because it kind of had a woodland vibe when I lost a lot of the trunks to my oak tree in front, I just placed some of them over here because I just kind of like the way they look. And now this is where I have my terracotta pots, and it's kind of a nice shady area to select my container of choice. And this whole area is just quieter. And I like the fact that when you come in the gate, it's very shady and it creates this kind of arbor. Stuart, if you look up, you can see that there's this, it's kind of a pergola or a living arbor.
They blend. You can really see how they interact with each other.
Yes, they interact. So where this bloodgood red maple then intertwines and creates this wonderful canopy as you come through the gate.
Yeah,
and I loved that.
Look how solid the shade is. You can look down.
Yeah, the shade is almost solid now.
Wow.
And it also shades a section of the driveway that can get very, very brutally hot. So it makes more of a pleasant entrance, that this entire area in the summer is more shady as you go into the backyard. And I really, really like that. So this was something that I did envision, and I'll be darned if it actually didn't come to fruition. So there's 2 more pictures for you to look at. And oh, and by the way, here is a tip. This was a very old fence, and it was up to, it was probably about this tall. And the top of it had gotten it just had started to erode away. Squirrels had done some damage on it, but I didn't want the expense of completely replacing the fence. So I came up with this idea of just putting some horizontal boards here, cutting off the fence to about this height, putting the horizontal boards on, and then adding a layer of lattice, and then topping it off with some finials, and then also having a surface at the top. So what this did was I didn't have to completely replace my fence. This was an inexpensive solution, and it worked both when it was still naturally starting to age naturally, but also it looks great, I think, after it was darkened up, and I really like the way it looks.
Looks good.
Okay, let's go on to the next area. So Stuart is trying to replicate this shot exactly, so you can't see my head right now. But this is the corner on the north end of the studio. And you can see that there's a lot of color there, in many ways more color than I have now. And most of it comes from perennials. So there's some stoichesia in there, there's some lilies, there's some veronica, there's some daylilies there. It looks like I might even have some yellow lantana in there. There's a lot more, there's just a lot more perennials. And as part of my less maintenance kind of part of my garden manifesto, I decided to have more blooming shrubs. And then I also just wanted my color to come from the containers. And also those perennials were just a lot more to maintain. So I had a couple of boxwood balls in there. They really grew up. There used to be a tiny one right here, and it got destroyed in a storm. But you can notice in some of the studio pictures that the large pots are still here on either end of the porch that leads into the studio, and only the contents have changed. Also, you'll notice how much shadier it is over here. This used to be a full sun aspect, and now it's considerably more shady. And that's another reason that there's not a lot of perennials in here, because there's not enough sun to support them. And what sun they get is really at the end of the day.
A running theme, more shade.
Yeah, a running theme, more shade. And I really like that. And I think it adds to the intimacy of the garden. And I honestly do not miss the color from the perennials. Oh, and I'm so glad you said that, Stuart. This is so important to point out. As you're answering these questions and you look at how it was in the past versus how it is now and which you like better, let me also point out that whenever these photos were taken, they were probably taken right before or right after a garden tour. So it looked its very best at that point in time. Today, I'm not garden tour ready or anything. This is just how it looks today. And I prioritized long-term, everyday good looks over sporadic good looks and perfection for a very short period of time. So this area right here will pretty much look this way all summer long. The image of this corner as it was looked that way for about a week. Let's move on to the next one. Well, this area has really changed. I used to call this area the Rose Bower area because it was just filled in the springtime with a massive, just a massive explosion of climbing old blush roses that grew and filled this entire corner. They crawled across the top of the studio. For a while, I used to have a telephone cord that came from the utility pole to the corner of the studio, and I would even let it crawl on the telephone line and cross the yard. And then where that ended, a Zephyrin Druin rose began and covered the arbor.
What a name.
Zephyrin Druin. A beautiful fragrant rose, one of my favorite roses. And there used to be an arbor right here, and it would climb that arbor.
It was
and again, when it was spectacular, it was spectacular. And especially I think it looked very Italian or very English because of the counterpoint of the tall junipers.
I remember always wondering when I first started working with you why you had trellises on your roof.
And that's because, thank you for pointing that out, that's because the climbing old blush rose used to climb on the trellis, and I would secure it to the trellis. Now, for multiple reasons, the rosy bower is no more. Again, when you're looking at this, you think, oh my gosh, these images, that is absolutely spectacular. I definitely liked it better back then. Keep in mind, it only looked that way for maybe 2 weeks max. And after that, it was a tangled mess of rose bushes that I then had to contend with, climb on the roof to get them to secure, cut back when they started to impale people and impede progress into the potager. But more importantly, the Zephyrin Druin, after many, many years, it suffered rose rosette, which then infected the climbing old blush. I took out the Zephyrin Druin, I took out the original climbing old blush, but it had layered itself and repropagated, so I still have it. And I love that, and now it just crawls across. As it begins to mature, it will continue to crawl across the picket fence here that had to be replaced.
Let me see if I get this. Only bloom for 2 weeks, but they're a huge pain afterwards.
Yes.
Because tulips only bloom for 2 weeks, but not as huge a pain afterwards.
No, and tulips bloom for longer than that.
Okay.
The progression of bloom is longer than that.
Okay.
But when you have a massive roses like that,
It seems short to me this year.
well, because the tulips, as with the roses, it all depends on the weather. Okay. So if I had those same roses this year, Stuart, they bloom in early April. If I had those same roses, they would have lasted probably about a week. If a week, yeah. Because the winds were so strong that they would bloom, and then the weather was in the 90s, and so they just wouldn't have their good looks for any period of time at all. But the work, the maintenance, the black spot, the Japanese beetles, the powdery mildew, that was a gift that kept on giving all through the year. And so for me, I like now the fact that what is here now, again, looks like this pretty much the entire growing season. I do have a spot of roses that bloom. Instead of the rose that I had to maintain growing on the side of the studio, I now have this ivy, which then crawls up the trellis on the roof. This is far easier to maintain. It likes the shadier aspect as well. It has the same English look, but it doesn't have all of the drawbacks. The other thing is, when I planted this rose, I was probably in my early 30s. I ain't in my early 30s anymore. I used to literally get on top of that roof. I don't want to get on top of the roof anymore at my age. And so because of that, it was kind of one of those good things, bad things. Once I realized once it was gone, I don't know that I missed it. The other major thing that a lot of you will go back and forth on this, because I know a lot of you really miss the arbor that was here. And it's in, Stuart misses it. It was in lots of the images of my book. But finally, after being here for so long, it just began to decay and it had to be replaced. And when we replaced it, when we had to rebuild this fence and these posts, I decided I didn't want it back for a number of different reasons. It was a little bit of an impediment to move from one space into the next space because there were 4 piers here for the trellis itself. It really, I think it impeded airflow. It made it difficult to get a wheelbarrow in and out. But primarily what it did was obstruct the vista, the long view from up closer to the house all the way through and back into the potager. So now, Stuart, I can stand here at this point in the garden. The rose isn't there any longer, the arbor isn't there any longer, and when I round this curve right here, in fact, I'm going to have you come all the way over here. I
figured you might, but I wasn't sure.
If you don't mind.
Not at all.
And by the way, you guys, when you watch this, I know this is a long, long video. You might want to break it up into stages. But I have wanted to do this. So many people have requested. Okay, look at that beautiful vista now. You can see all the way back into the potager. You can see the alliums. You can see the finials. Depending on where you navigate, you can see the contours of the boxwood. You can see the pickets of the fence. When that rose was there, in this picture, you could see none of that. And in the winter and in the summer, it was just green. Now I have much better air circulation and I can see all the way back through here to my dovecote, to what's going on in the potager. And the other thing that I love about it is it seems like a much larger space. than it seemed before. It seemed like it was kind of cramped and kind of pushed up against the east side fence. Now it feels much more spacious, a much larger area, and I think a little bit more befitting the grandeur of my house. So let's move on to the potager itself and wrap this up. Now this is going to be a pretty dramatic change, and I have to say, in looking at this older picture, it really was beautiful at this point in time. Again, this point in time didn't last very long, and I am more about the long term right now. But you can definitely see a number of different changes. First of all, the absence of the rose, it's not here any longer. The arbor is not here any longer. And also, and this was something I really equivocated on, once I put up these posts, and I'd kind of like your input on this, I decided not to put, you'll see that there's a gate into the potager that used to be here. And the reason it was here, and I love the gate because I designed it so that the pickets were tall and then they got shorter and then they got tall again. And I loved that. And I had a little ornament that my mom had given me that I hung on it. And the reason I had that gate, it was added later after the arbor was built, because we had a tiny little dog then, and the dog would get in here and then could get out. And so I had to do something to contain her to this area of the garden. So we called it a Billy gate, because I had a dog named after Billie Holiday, my favorite singer, and we called it a Billy gate. We lost Billy, so there was no longer really a reason to have it here. And again, because there's so much warping in gates as the weather changes, and they tend to not open as easily over time. They tend to begin to sag. I just decided that I didn't want that frustration, again, more ease, and so I didn't enclose this. And I have to say, I really like the fact that it's open. It makes ingress and egress that much easier. And I also like the way now that these large pots, which used to be conical boxwood, which just really they just got way too mature and had to be replaced. Now I can have two dramatic pots here as a point of entry. Now right now, you'll notice that it doesn't look nearly as cluttered in this old picture as it does now. That's because I'm in a state of transition, moving pots around, and it's more of a workspace than it is just a beautiful photo shoot ready area. Again, these were taken just prior to either a magazine shoot or a garden tour. So these look perfect. Right now, even though it doesn't look perfect, I still think it looks really beautiful. Some of the other images I want to show you, you could notice in the back that I did stain the fence to match that dark color, and I like it much better. It tends to just recede instead of standing out. That fence has now pretty much been obscured by the growth of the nandina behind it, and also the ivy which grows on it, which gives it a very English look, and I can contain it. And I also grew, just to give a little punch of yellow, there's a small-leaved golden Fortuny euonymus that grows up one of those posts. So, and then I put there used to be some in-ground boxwoods there. These were there because I transplanted them from the front area I showed you near the back porch. Over time, I wanted to move those, and I have two pots that now punctuate the corner. Again, too many pots, it's too busy right now. Everything is in a state of flux. But what amazes Stuart is how much the boxwood has grown. And that was why I had to take some drastic measures to reduce its size. Remove the boxwood balls on the ends. You used to be able to walk through them. You can't anymore. I widened the brick path that goes into the center. There used to be, in the interior at juxtaposition points, I used to have some golden Fortuny euonymus. It's not there anymore because it would get scale, and I removed it. When the boys were little, I would grow different things in the middle. I grew baby boo pumpkins one year and Jack B. Little pumpkins, and my kids got great delight out of that. But again, that was a lot of work. And then probably the biggest difference is in is in this border here. And it used to be filled with climbing dawn roses, with lots of larkspur, with tons of perennials, with lots of poppies, and there wasn't anything in here to ground this space. Pretty much once that show was finished, I had to come in here, pull out all the poppies, pull out all the larkspur because they were just dead and brown. The roses just were a mess, and as much as I love dawn roses, pink dawn roses, they are a prickly bear, and they were very difficult to wrestle with, and I just decided that I liked and then this Virginia creeper would start to entangle in them, and I would just spend hours out here trying to get it to look presentable. I don't have to do any of that anymore. Now there are fixtures in here, my alliums, there's different things that come up every year, and even before I've put in any of my summer seasonal color, it still looks pretty nice, doesn't it, Stuart?
Absolutely.
It still looks pretty nice, and I've done very, very little to it. I haven't even pruned the boxwood cones that are punctuate either end. I haven't even done that yet. And I also like the columnar contrast of these emerald green arborvitaes. And yes, you guys have also commented, excuse me, I just hit my mic. You guys have also commented that you like the way the ivy looks across the top. And I do too, I really like that. But again, it's very, very high maintenance. My neighbor to the back is going to replace their fence, so it may go bye-bye for a while. But as you all know, it's very, very tenacious and it will probably come back.
I never knew the potager to be small. That's why it amazes me so much to see those images.
That at one time I planted, and by the way, you guys, I planted this design. I just eyeballed it, and I planted 1 gallon wintergreen boxwoods on about 15-inch centers. After I was in Barnsley House, I talk a lot about that in my book, and I planted it on 15-inch centers, and it doesn't look fabulous right now, but it still looks pretty good. And as it continues to grow out, it will look even better. And this is kind of the beginning of the summer season, so pretty soon these will all be filled with vegetables and things. And the reason that I didn't plant too much spring stuff in some of them is because I want as much sun as possible to hit the center boxwood and the perimeter of the outside boxwood, because I want it to fill in and recover. So there are times, no, I was not going to, somebody said, well, maybe you should just take it all out and replant it. No. First of all, I have an emotional attachment to this. Number two, it may not be perfect anymore, but it's still beautiful. Number three, that would be a huge expense. And number four, I would still be waiting another 2 years for it to all grow together like this. So I am willing to put up for 1 year where it looks kind of clunky and you know, kind of like an awkward teenager, than to tear it out and have it start all over again. I think it is beautiful regardless, and I love the way it captures the light.
It still makes me smile almost the same way it did the first time I didn't know it was here, and I saw the rest of the yard and thought, you know, this is great. And then you come back around the corner and realize,
oh my
crap,
gosh, this is, yeah, this is all back here.
It still does it today.
And I love the way that it's enclosed. I talk a lot about that in the book. If you want to see more pictures of what it looked like back then definitely get a copy of my book and you can compare it to real time. But I loved it as much then as I do now. Actually, I think I love it more now because it's so much easier to maintain. And I've replaced so many perennials that were high maintenance with blooming shrubs and evergreens. It looks 10 times better all year round than rather looking perfect for just nanoseconds in time. And it has, the other thing I love about it is it has evolved and kind of parallels the evolution of my family, myself as a gardener, and as I age along with it. So that concludes our garden design makeover. That was before, this is now, and I'll be so curious what you guys have to say. Stuart, I know it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for you to get all of these stills up.
It's going to be fun.
But hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Please make sure to let me know if you enjoyed it. If you're not a follower, make sure to subscribe. If you are a follower and you want to become a member with some additional perks in addition to just all of these free videos, then you want to join. Do that on your computer by going to my main page on YouTube. And Stuart, have we forgotten anything else?
I don't think so.
Oh, there is one other thing. If you've made it to the end, I'm going to be, speaking of my book, I'm going to do a book signing at Plant People this weekend from 1 to 3 in Midtown, and I would love to see you there. And also be ready, next Wednesday we're going to do our first live Wednesday walkabout in the evening at 6 Central Standard Time. Get your glass of wine or your cup of coffee or your cup of tea or your iced tea, whatever your beverage of choice is, and we can walk around together. So there you go, a very long and I think very special episode for you guys. And here you go, here's your outfit of the day. My sunglasses kind of have that John Lennon vibe, and I got these online. They're just inexpensive ones. My earrings are these wonderful silver hoops. I like these so much. And by the way, you guys, I don't know if I've ever mentioned, these are not heavy at all. They're very lightweight, so they're, yeah, they look heavy, I think, but they're hollow, so they're not heavy at all. My fun overalls, I got these online, and Stuart, we need to put up a link, but I got these online. They are so comfortable, and as much as I love my denim overalls, they're a little bit heavier. These are so lightweight, so they are perfect for summer, and you could wear all sorts of fun tops over them. I just really, really like them, and I especially like them because they have pockets. My boots, these are some new boots from High C, new to me. They're patent leather boots. Again, I love this brand so much because you can just get in and out of them so easily without even having to touch them. And another thing I like about them is the top is really soft, so it doesn't cut into your skin. These, I will save these, my patent leather boots, for Sunday, just like when you were a kid and you saved your patent leather shoes for church on Sunday. I will probably save these for après gardening and wear some different High C boots when I'm working out in the garden. But they also come in red and yellow, and I just think they're adorable. So there you go, there's my outfit of the day.